and he opened up his kit bag, and it got, shall we say, implements with him that weren't force issue, and a bottle of holy water that he'd got from his local village church. But it's probably the only time that during my career within the Lincolnshire Police, that I've been asked to investigate a werewolf. In 1988, I was a serving police officer with Lincolnshire Police, and at this time I was on a task force unit. Part of the unit's responsibility was to, as and when required, to carry out covert surveillance and covert operations as and when required. I recall this incident occur in either late November, early December of 1988, and it involved a prowler at an isolated farmhouse on the Lincolnshire and Nottinghamshire border, close to RAF Swinderby. Apparently the female occupant and her teenage daughter were being harassed on a nightly basis by a prowler that, according to the female occupant, was howling outside the property like a werewolf. She was having taps at the windows, scratching on doors, this constant mournful howling, which was really distressing them. From what I understand, each time they called for the police to attend, obviously by the time the units had got there, bearing in mind the property's location, whoever was causing these problems had disappeared. Her husband, who worked away in the Middle East, wasn't satisfied with how the police were dealing with it and escalated the matter in the form of a complaint to the Chief Constable, which resulted in my unit being involved. We all laughed when we were briefed by our sergeant, and we just assumed that it was just a normal prowler. But obviously, you know, we were taking this very seriously because the woman and her daughter were very distressed and distraught. We drove down to the property on the first night using plain pool vehicles. These were just run-of-the-mill vehicles that Lincolnshire Police used to buy from auctions to use on these surveillance. They were no different to any other car on the road, and as such they couldn't be sort of identified as a police vehicle. I remember we travelled down in two cars, one which we parked outside the farmhouse, the other which we secreted away in a barn. There were 6 of us on the unit, including our sergeant. 2 were stationed within the house, and the remainder of us were in locations around the property, sort of in outbuildings, and completely out of sight of anybody that would attend the house. The first night went without any incident. Nothing happened at all. My sergeant, he had gone into the house the first night, and when we left, sort of 1:30, 2 in the morning, we were briefed, and he gave us a bit of more of an update of what had been happening. He confirmed that the woman was in a very, very distressed state over what had happened in the previous weeks. She recounted to him that on numerous occasions this prowler had been howling, you know, around her property, and the way she described it to my sergeant was like a werewolf off of one of the films. You know, there's this mournful howl and this constant tapping and scratching at the doors, and the lady, quite rightly, was completely terrified. As I say, the first night passed without incident, and the second night passed without incident. But what was really sort of disturbing, one of my colleagues on the unit He was a really down-to-earth guy. I was with him in the barn, and he opened up his kit bag, and he'd got, shall we say, implements with him that weren't force issue, and a bottle of holy water that he'd got from his local village church. I can remember saying he was quite disturbed, and he kept saying there's something not right with this. And being a group of lads, you know, we sort of all laughed at him. You know, we thought it was hilarious that he turned up with bits and bobs to combat something that he believed it was, rather than being just a prowler. Anyway, on the third night we got there at the usual time, sort of early evening, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the evening. Took up our various positions in and around the property. It got to about, I think it was the early hours of the morning, and there was the lads inside radioed or sent out a message saying that they'd heard either tapping or a bang on one of the doors of the property. I think it was the side door, which was not particularly within our sort of field of view from where we were. We rushed out of the barn, leaving our location, to the side of the property where the taps were heard, and there was nobody there. We did have surveillance equipment with us. We scanned the area, couldn't see a thing. We called on a dog handler that was also on standby. He attended the property, and with his dog picked up a scent trail around the side door of the house where this banging had been, and subsequently with one of my other colleagues set off across one of the fields. After about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, he returned to the farmhouse to say that the dog had picked up a really good scent trail and it was pulling really hard across the field. He said they'd got probably about 3/4 of the way across the field, and suddenly the dog had lost the scent. From what I was told, there were no dikes or anything like that could have interrupted the trail, and the trail had just gone dead. We all gathered back at the property, had another briefing. By this time it was getting to about sort of half two in the morning. We decided that it was probably futile in remaining there for the rest of the evening. Obviously, you know, responding to the tapping at the window would have alerted anybody to our presence being there. We returned again the following evening, and again it was just, it was just dead. Nothing happened at all. And I think the following evening after that, again, nothing happened. It was a completely quiet evening. Again, it was a crisp, frosty night. Obviously my sergeant had made reports to his duty inspector, and I think after the 6th night, because nothing had happened other than on the 3rd night, the operation was called off from our respect, you know, because we'd put quite a bit of man hours into it without having anything. We were told a week or two after that nothing further had happened, and as far as I'm aware, the prowler, I don't know whether he'd been disturbed or realised that we were watching the property, but all incidents surrounding this house stopped after our sort of intervention there. Obviously nobody was arrested at the time, but I think our presence there resolved the matter. But it's probably the only time that during my career within the Lincolnshire Police, that I've been asked to investigate a werewolf. The daughter and the lady of the house, as I say, when we spoke to them, were convinced that whoever or whatever it wasn't just somebody prowling. They were seriously concerned and seriously thought that it was something more than just somebody pestering them. I remember there was a suggestion that the son of a local farmer may have been responsible, but we never had anything to prove this. The farm that he lived in was in the opposite direction from what the dog handler made or followed the scent trail. So whoever left the property that night headed away from the farmhouse where the suspected lad was. So I don't know, but it was a really eerie sort of job. You know, there was just something about it that didn't feel right. Yeah, I've been on loads of jobs, you know, where we've been to prowlers, and you just, you know, it was just a prowler. This, it just didn't seem right. As I say, the night when the lads in the house heard the tapping or banging on the door, we responded, you know, very, very quickly to that side of the property, and there was just nobody there, and it was sort of open field. Other than the outbuildings, it was just open fields around the house. There was nowhere for anybody to go. They must have moved very, very quick. That's all I can say, because as I say, we had powerful searchlights with us, night vision equipment. We didn't see anybody. I suppose there's always the chance that it could have been something banging on the window other than a person. You know, possibly a bird or something had flown into it. I don't know. But I just can't explain why we didn't identify somebody that evening, because I say our response to this report of the banging on the window was really, really quick. But that's it. There's not a lot more I can say other than, yes, we didn't find the person, and no, we didn't see a werewolf.